Welcome back, everybody. I hope you made the most of the 5 minutes coffee break just to catch your breath, ready for some more exciting data to be shared, again by Jan and Noel, but also with Amanda as well. So Amanda Saint-Germain-Serre, her bio says that she's a licensed professional counselor and a board-certified music therapist with 10 years of clinical experience in counseling and music therapy. And she's taught music therapy at Texas Women's University as an adjunct for 3 years and has been in her current position as a visiting clinical instructor of music therapy for the last 3 years. So collectively, the three authors are going to co-present the next session, which will be about induced after-death communication for grief, a randomized controlled study.
Thank you very much, Chris. I realized after we finished the last that I didn't get to 2 slides that I'm just going to show really quickly so people can see that there are resources, and I'll be sending Andrew and David the PDF of this PowerPoint so that people can access it if they want to and see some of this these resources. So when Jenny finished her dissertation, she'd read everything there was to read about after-death communication up to that time, which was about 2010. And I said, if somebody came up to you and asked, what's the single best book to read about after-death communication? She said, Bill Guggenheim and Judy Guggenheim's book, Hello from Heaven, which is replete with cases. Now, there are other options. I wrote an overview of after-death communication in a recent book, Connecting Soul, Spirit, Mind, and Body. The actual full references are in the next slide. And then, as we've been mentioning, Evelyn and Chris's study, and David, and they had one other colleague, they published a cases booklet and a research findings booklet. So between these sources, you would get a really well-rounded view. So here are those references. Here are Noel's and my email addresses. And again, and I think actually, Andrew or David, someone asked if the recordings will be available, if would they be able to get like the PDF of this PowerPoint. Can you tell us?
The short answer is yes. We're recording all of our main sessions, and all attendees will be sent the links to see those recordings. And as far as the PowerPoint, if you're happy, Jan, to share those PowerPoint slides, then we can certainly forward those on.
Okay, wonderful. All right, very good. So Noel, I think I've stopped sharing.
Yep.
And yeah.
And I am switching over to, let's see. All right. Okay, is everyone seeing the actual presentation slide of the study?
Yes. Well, I am seeing the current slide and the next slide. I don't know whether that's only because I'm a co-host or
there we go. That's it. Yep.
There you go.
Very good. Thank you. Sorry, I have 2 monitors, and so I need to make sure that I have the right thing shared. So thank you for that. So, so just to start, this is a study that quite a large group of us worked on together. I approached Jan about conducting a study on after-death communication, or you know, something along those lines. And we talked about induced after-death communication, and really wanting to look at how this would work with grief, people dealing with grief. So this was quite a labor of love. It took us about 3 years total to complete the study, but it's the first randomized controlled study on induced after-death communication. So basically, you know, we talked a bit about Jan. I think you're gonna take it off, take the beginning here, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Talking about Al. Go ahead.
So, and let me see. Do I? So I don't have the power to change this, so I'll just say next.
Yes, that'll be great.
Okay, so the question is, these experiences seem to be so healing for people that, but up until rather recently, you just had to kind of wait to see if it would occur. It was just it would happen spontaneously, if at all. And there's a phenomenon that I call ADC envy. And that's where somebody who hasn't had an ADC but would love to have one with a particular disembodied loved one, hasn't had it, someone else has, and the one who wants it feels very envious that they haven't had the direct communication that someone else has. There are a lot of reasons for why that can occur, not the least of which that we found in doing facilitated after-death communication in counseling, that if someone is grasping after the experience, if they're very emotionally invested, that actually blocks or interferes with the experience. What seems to help is to be in this, we mentioned this in the last session, in this state of open, inviting, but centered, receptive mode. And that seems to be when ADCs occur the most. So we wondered, or it has been wondered whether these could be somehow facilitated. And psychologist Al Botkin was working as a psychologist at the U.S. Veterans Administration, working with veterans who had post-traumatic stress disorder. And he was using EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, where at that time they were using 2 fingers and moving them back and forth in front of the person's eyes, and using this process to process traumatic memories. And he was working with a patient one day who had been a soldier in Vietnam. And he asked, they'd been working on some trauma work in the session, and when they finished for that little bit of trauma, they still had just like 10 minutes left in the session. So Al said, well, how about if I just throw in another set of eye movements? He moved his fingers back and forth in front of the patient's eyes, and then the patient closed his eyes, and let's see what comes up. Well, little did Al know what he was getting into, because he, when he did the set and the guy closed his eyes, the patient burst into tears. He was overcome with emotion. Al was like, oh no, what have I done? The guy's decompensating, and I only have a couple minutes to get him back together. But he waited, and as the guy continued with his eyes closed, his tears stopped, and he got this huge smile on his face, and he was just seemingly elated. And when he opened his eyes, Al said, what happened? And the guy said, I saw her. And Al said, her who? And he said, oh, Lee. And Al's thinking, Lee, who is this guy talking about? Well, back a few weeks before, when Al took a history, this guy had told him the story that when he was in Vietnam, he was in a group that was outposted in the jungle, and they would go off and do missions and then come back to their camp. And orphans had found their way to the camp because the soldiers would give them food and so forth. Well, this soldier had developed a father-daughter kind of relationship with this young Vietnamese girl named Lee. And this guy had a daughter at home that was Lee's same age. And so it was like this father-daughter thing. And he had known her for a couple of months. And one day, a truck came from the nearby large city from an orphanage to pick up the children to take them away. So he's bidding a tearful farewell. And just as they're loading the children into the truck, shots ring out, and there's a sniper, a Viet Cong sniper. And they get the kids off the truck, and there's some more shots. They send out some soldiers to try to get the sniper. And after a few minutes, they hear some more shots, and the all clear. So the sniper has been killed. And they get the children back up, and this guy can't find Lee. And he walks around to the side of the truck and sees her lying on the ground in lifeless body. She had been killed by the sniper. And he said that her death was more painful to him than even seeing his colleague, blown up in the jungle on a mission. So here we are now, like 20 years later, and this man says he's just seen Lee in this experience with his eyes closed. He described how she looked, and she expressed gratitude for how he had treated her and all this. And Al, the psychologist, this was like not in Al's worldview whatsoever. And so when but the guy seemed fine after they talked about it for just a couple of minutes, and so he sent him back out on the ward. Well, to Al's surprise, within a week, the guy had been completely symptom-free since that after-death communication, which Al didn't even have a word for at the time, and the guy was released. He was cured, and that got Al really curious. Well, long story short, Al refined this technique, left the Veterans Administration, went into private practice, and really centered his practice around offering this service. And he came to call it induced after-death communication, even though he says that the therapist does not actually induce the experience, we actually facilitate it. And that the experience remains essentially spontaneous, but we can help to facilitate the state of mind in which the experience can occur. And so he wrote his book, Induced After-Death Communication. You can do a search online, and we can go to the next little bullet point. So in 2013, 2 studies were published in the Journal of Near-Death Studies, and one was a report of Botkin's IADC clientele and their responses to some questionnaires that he uses with his clients, showing that they had very profound healing experiences from this procedure. And then he had trained a number of therapists who also were keeping records of and having their clients answer questions. And the second article was about those therapists' experiences with IADC with their clients. And from both of these sources, it seemed like IADC offered something really unique and powerful in grief counseling, but no one had ever studied it in a randomized controlled study. So that's what we decided to do. And our research question was, after controlling for pre-test scores, is there a statistically significant difference on grief-related post-test scores between people receiving IADC versus traditional grief counseling? And before I turn this over to Noelle, I'll just say that anyone embarking on this kind of research needs to be prepared for a hero's journey, because getting our institutional review board to approve this study, I have never had to jump through the hoops. It was like they kept saying, "You're going to do what?" And we had to explain over and over again exactly what the procedure was. It was very clear and so forth, but it's just like, just because it was something about after-death communication, it seemed to interfere with people's ability to reason. But finally it was approved, and now we're going to hear from Noelle about the method for the study.
All right. So in terms of our participants, we were recruiting individuals who were English-speaking adults who self-reported as grieving a loved one who died at least a year ago. The reason for that time frame is because what Al found with the induced after-death communication process, and I'll just refer to it as IADC, was that if individuals had not accepted the loss and kind of gone through that first, if you look at the traditional stages of grieving, that they needed to be kind of past that first stage of grieving in order to be in an appropriate place for the procedure, really, is what it comes down to. It's not that they wouldn't be able to have an experience, but in terms of this process, you need to make sure the person has accepted the loss before they would actually be in a place where this would be an appropriate intervention, because it is a clinical intervention. So that's something I want to make sure and just stress that this is an actual clinical process that he developed over time. He did this while he was at the VA. So we recruited our participants through a variety of sources: local groups, senior center here in Denton, Texas, university faculty and students at UNT and others, speaking engagements that Jan was involved in locally. And we also used Facebook and word of mouth, different contacts, different points of communication that we could get out to people and spread the word. So in terms of the counselors that were involved, we had 8 traditional counselors. And when we say traditional, they were doing traditional grief counseling. And they were all doctoral students. One was an LPC, 6 were LPC interns, and one was an international student who was not an LPC because she was internationally trained, so she had equivalence in that regard. They had about an average of 6.25 years of experience, with a range of about 2 to 8 years postmaster's counseling experience. And they all received training. We wanted to have consistency in how they were approaching the counseling work they were doing from a grief perspective. So they all had a training of on grief counseling that I developed and provided to them, a 3-hour grief training. For the IADC counselors, there were 5 IADC counselors, 3 doctoral students, one of whom was an LPC, and 2 LPC interns, and 2 LPCs. One was a master's level, had a master's level degree, and the other had a doctoral level degree. They had combined experience, a mean of about 9.2 years experience. There was one outlier with 22 years experience that kind of pulled that mean up, but their range was between 2 and 22 years experience. And the training was conducted by an IADC trainer in Arlington, Texas, named Graham Maxey. And after that training, there was also peer supervision, again, to make sure there was consistency in the way in which the counselors were handling the sessions. So we screened the participants by using qualifying questions to rule out things that would be contraindicated in the use of IADC. For example, psychosis or certain types of dissociative disorders would be ruled out. So we used qualifying questions, a series of demographic questions, and allowed them to select a pseudonym. And we had 8 questions selected from the modified mini screen and 8 items from the Dissociative Experience Scale Taxon, DEST, which is a shortened version of the DES, that really looks at pathological dissociation. Again, we were trying to rule out anything that would be contraindicated for this particular process, which generally would be suicidality, pathological dissociation, or psychosis.
Noelle, let me interrupt. Someone asked, what is an LPC? It's a licensed professional counselor. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I can't see the chat, Jan, so thank you for catching that.
Yeah.
So our intervention included we were really looking to see what we had to look at how individuals were, how this was impacting grief. So one of the tools that we used to look at grief reactions was the Holden Grief Reaction Checklist, which had 6 main factors we were identifying there: blame and anger, despair, detachment, disorganization, panic behavior, and personal growth. And so we were looking at individuals' reactions to those items on the checklist. And on the ongoing attachment inventory, we looked at one factor, which was continuing presence. And we've seen in the literature that continuing bonds is an important aspect in working with grief. So we wanted to see not only the impact of the interventions on grief factors, but also on the individual's experience of the continuing bond. And so we did additional pre and post questions that were qualitative in nature to gather a little bit more information as well. Our general procedures involved an online screening, and then we assigned the individuals who qualified for the study to one of 3 groups: a traditional grief counseling group, an IADC counseling group, or a waitlist group. And there, we did randomly assign them to groups, and we had these 2 groups, both of the treatment groups, the IADC group and traditional grief counseling group, received 2 2-hour sessions of counseling on sequential Saturdays at an on-campus university counseling program clinic. So in that first session, that first 2-hour session, they completed a pretest and did a 90-minute counseling session. The following Saturday, they came back and completed a 90-minute counseling session followed by the post-test. The waitlist group completed the same assessments that were used for pre and post-test online at home on the same days approximately. We asked them to do them on the same days, so it was within a framework there. Approximately the same time and same days as the counseling participants involved in the study. However, we did discontinue the use of the waitlist group because there were some ethical concerns. As we noted, participants coming in and doing the surveys, when they were doing the actual inventories as pre-tests, sometimes it would activate their grief and cause them some distress. And so we were concerned about allowing people in the waitlist group to complete those surveys, with the potential to have any activated symptoms of their grief without giving them a treatment. So we decided to discontinue use of the waitlist group. In terms of the demographics of our participants, we had 56 people who began the study, who qualified to begin the study. And of those, 41 actually completed the study. Of those 41, 26 were in the IADC group, so four dropped out, had attrition there, and 15 were in the traditional grief counseling group. We actually had 11 who dropped out. So we found it interesting that there were more who dropped out in the traditional grief counseling group than who dropped out in the IADC group. So there was a predominance of, in terms of the predominant demographic makeup of our participants, we had a majority of female, 93%, older, about 78% were older than 50 years, and predominantly white, about 90%. In terms of education, 63% had at least a bachelor's degree or more, and 93% self-identified as religious or spiritual. And their religious or spiritual beliefs were self-identified as moderate to liberal in about 90% of cases. So we're very aware of the makeup of our participants being in a particular direction, which raised the question for us, and of course this would be of interest in further study, of whether this is the makeup of individuals who kind of gear toward this particular type of research and experience, or if that's just who reached out for the study. Of those that reported grieving the loss, we asked who they were grieving. 63% said they were grieving the loss of a relative, and 32% said they were grieving the loss of a spouse or an intimate partner. So the majority of individuals were grieving someone close to them. And then in terms of, we asked about how many individuals had a spontaneous after-death communication, something they would identify as an ADC, prior to enrolling in the study. 56% reported some sense of presence. 27% said they were uncertain, and 17% said they had no sense of presence prior to the study. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to discuss our results, and just let me know when you need me to proceed through the slides. Amanda, are you?
Sorry, I'm on mute. The results of the study, we checked our Cronbach alphas level to ensure that we had sufficient reliability. And as you can see, we had 0.70 reliability on all aspects of the scale. So all subtests of the Holden and also on the ongoing attachment inventory. So we had sufficient reliability across the board. We ran a multivariate analysis of covariance on the Holden, and we had no data missing. We confirmed that model assumptions that are listed there, homogeneity, variance, bivariate correlation, and all the other things that are listed there were met. So we checked our data before we ran statistical tests, and everything looked good. We found that there was a significant treatment effect, and we had a large effect size. And there was sufficient power, so we made sure that we weren't going to run into the possibility of creating a type 2 error. Overall, what we discovered here was that IADC was more beneficial than traditional grief counseling. For the Holden subtest, we did a post hoc analysis and used a Bonferroni correction here, so that we could make sure that we weren't also running into the possibility of creating a type 1 error. So we made sure that we were, going to correctly find an effect if there was one that existed, and also made sure that we weren't going to dismiss anything. What we found here was that on blame and anger, Holden subtests, we had a significant result here with a moderate effect size. Despair, as you can see, is in blue because it got really close to that level of significance that we were looking for. So it also had a moderate effect size, and this is interesting that these sense of blame and anger and despair both reduced in this way. Other areas here, detachment did not have a significant result, but disorganization and panic behavior had small effect sizes. You can move forward, thank you. With the ongoing attachment inventory, we ran ANOVA here, or ANCOVA I should say. There were no missing data. Everything was confirmed to be appropriate, so we met all of our model assumptions there. And what we found on this subtest was that continuing presence did have a significant result with a small effect size.
So one of the things that we wanted to do, I'm going to go ahead actually and show, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. I'm going to use the opportunity to share about a 5-minute video clip of an IADC session that was part of the study, and I've gotten permission to share this. And then I'll return to the sorry, I'm having trouble.
Well, while you're doing that, Noelle, I'll give a little background so what actually happens in the sessions, we start by taking an extensive history and finding out what's the relationship with between our client and their disembodied loved one. And then we launch into the induced after death communication, which involves, instead of eye movement, we've transitioned to using tapping. So the important thing is bilateral stimulation, that is a sequence of stimulating both sides of the brain to create that centered place where the experience is more likely to occur. So go ahead.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, but for those of you not familiar with EMDR was developed primarily to work with trauma, and the bilateral stimulation is thought to help integrate those experiences and reduce the impact of those traumatic events in terms of the memory. So with the bilateral stimulation in the induced after death communication, we're focusing on the core sadness that the individual is experiencing as a result of the loss. And what you'll see in this video clip, I'm working with a gentleman named Pete, and he had two experiences of loss that he was actually bringing to session. One was with his wife, who had died after 39 years of marriage related to ALS. And then the second was his fiance, who had died also related to ALS. And so in this clip, he's going to be, you'll see me doing a little bit of tapping, and that's the bilateral stimulation portion of the induced after death communication. And then you'll hear Pete kind of asking a question. At this point in the session, we've already done some bits of this already, and I was at a point where I said, is there anything more that you would like to either ask or say to either of these individuals? And he said, yes, I have a question that I want to ask. And so he's going to be directing this to Renee, his fiance. Jan, I just want to check. Can you see my screen, the blue screen?
I see a blue screen. Uh-huh.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, looking good.
Go down the road to decline where you. I was with you, actually. Yes. What happened? That wasn't what we were supposed to do. This is what we were supposed to do. You're doing the right thing. You're doing it just right. Keep talking. We were gonna manage her decline. We were gonna live through it, just like I'd done before, because it had been really a beautiful experience, and we were gonna do that. But she wasn't gonna do that. I mean, it wasn't her choice not to do that. It was her choice to actually to do it, but it wasn't supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm. That's what you got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't her choosing not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It was that. That's the way it was supposed to be.
And that was a question in your mind.
Yeah, and I don't need to know why. I mean, I know there are reasons why.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'll know them at some point.
Mm-hmm. But you needed to know whether that was Renee's choice or not.
Yeah.
Because she had,
Was she choosing to
right.
go to leave?
Right. Because she had told you she was choosing to stay.
Yeah.
So this gave you an
And she was
opportunity.
looking. What I got was that she was looking forward to living that love. Wholehearted.
And what does that do for you?
That she wanted that for me. It's just everything.
next week we can talk more about any new insights you've had or any new experiences you've had, and see where you are at that point. If anything new has emerged that you want to.
Well, I'm getting something right now, and that is that it's hard for them.
Okay.
To have to get through to us, and they like it when they can, and that's why they want me to keep talking like this, because if I can learn how to hear, they have very explicit things to say.
So that's an important message.
Yeah.
It's a really important and helpful message. It's helpful for me too, because it validates what we're doing as well in trying to help.
And they're saying it helps them. It helps them, because that's the purpose of they want us to know about, but they want us to feel and experience that connection that we have.
Yeah.
And this is good for that. Yeah.
That's great to know. That's really great to know. And that confirms a lot of my sense of it as well.
Yeah.
Because I see this as much broader than just working with grief. My experience of this and what I've experienced through this personally, as well as in doing this work, is
there's a purpose for this after-death communication, and it's helpful to our purpose in living.
I agree.
Okay. So let me switch back. Okay. And right, how are we doing on time? Let me see. Are you seeing, I need to switch the display again?
Yes,
Yes.
I can see it.
Working now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so Jan, do you think we have time to go through the narratives, or you want to just?
I'm trying to remember how much time we have.
We're going to go to Q&A at 5 o'clock, which is in another 15 to 18 minutes.
Perfect.
Okay, I think we're good. All right, so Amanda, do you want to start with the narratives?
Sure. I wanted to ask you though, Noelle, first, since on my screen, I know you had subtitles at the bottom of that video, but I wasn't able to view them.
Oh no, okay.
I'm not sure if anybody else's video revealed that or if everybody was able to see the subtitles.
I was able to see them, but I don't know about others.
Okay, that's good.
I was able to see them as well.
Okay, great.
Good.
I just wanted to check to make sure in case there was any additional explanation that was needed.
Thank you for checking. I appreciate that.
Sure. Okay, so we had a lot of really rich data that came out of, oh, someone said actually no, mostly not. They weren't able to.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry to
saw
hear that.
part of it also.
Only
My
part.
my hope is that on the recording that it might be visible. I do hope that you'll be able to see that. If we do have questions about what you saw, please do let us know at the Q&A.
And maybe we could just say really briefly, I got two main things from it. One was that he had planned with his fiance to help her through the process of her decline in ALS until her natural death. And she died much faster than that. She was taken suddenly. And so he wanted to know if she was, like disappointed or like what happened. And essentially he got the message that things happened the way they were supposed to. We had our idea about how things were supposed to unfold, but they really unfolded the way they were meant to. And the other thing was about just that the process of ADC, of IADC, was very helpful. That they were, both his wife and his fiance were telling him that they want to communicate with him, and they really appreciated this opportunity. It's hard for them to get through, and IADC helped them, you know, be able to make the connection. And there are things they want to convey, so that it was very productive.
Thank you, Jan.
Yeah.
All right, Amanda?
Yes. So we had a lot of rich data and experiences like that happened with Pete. We had a lot of things that came out of the experience other than just, you know, a positive or beneficial effect for the people in the IADC group. They often reported interesting experiences that we wanted to include here with client narratives. So with Chuck, what he found helpful was, he said, it gave me, it being the IADC experience, gave me an alternate way of sharing my grief, and it made me feel more alleviated, calmer, more certain that my loved one is watching over me, wants me to feel at peace, to know that it's going to be all right, that he's still there protecting me. And Olivia said, the feeling of completion around closure, in the sense that just because my father is gone does not mean that we cannot continue to be able to still have a father-daughter relationship. So you can see those continuing bonds there and a lot of the relief that people experienced.
And Elise said that it was helpful in terms of connecting with my loved one in a way I've never experienced, and had a sense of presence. I could communicate, I felt I could communicate with my loved one in a more direct way during the first session. During the interim between the two sessions, I also felt more connected and felt her presence with me. During the second session, I felt the communication was even more open and direct, and it gave me a new perspective on my experience of grieving. And one of the things Pete had said, he used the word explicit. He said he had had experiences of connection with both his wife and his fiance, and prior to the study, but he said this experience was more explicit, and that was a distinctive difference for him. So there was a participant who also reported that prior to these sessions, I felt like I was stuck in processing grief over the death of my son. For better or worse, I feel momentum to move forward. And for the first time in many months this past week, I've been able to think of her son without crippling sadness, without the encumbrance of deep, deep sadness. I feel like I can think more fully about him and his life rather than solely on his death. Mm-hmm. And I'll go ahead and do this one too, because this was actually one of the clients I worked with, Neil. Neil said, I was able to feel a release from regret and guilt. I replaced guilt and regret with overwhelming love. The counselor helped me to relax and move into my feeling of loss and guilt. The feeling of loss and guilt was quickly replaced with the connection of love, peace, and joy. And I can tell you, sitting in the room with this client, there was a visible shift in everything, in her body language, in her voice, and she relaxed so much after the ADC experience, and said that she felt this overwhelming feeling of peace and joy and love. And she had a pretty high level of guilt prior to the ADC that dissipated completely. And that was sustained throughout the week. Amanda?
Yeah, this was a client that I worked with, Josie, and Josie said, well, in the session, my mother and grandson appeared in my mind's eye. It was amazing. My deep despair was completely obliterated by an overwhelming sense of peace and joy. I can't stop smiling. I've meditated several times since my session, and my mother and grandson appeared again, and I feel light, free, floating, and mostly gratitude. Josie had a very overwhelmingly positive experience, and was responsible for a quote that Jan liked to say, because Josie said that it was better than sex. She thought it was such an amazing experience. Lynn also said, profound thoughts and words came to me during the in-session experience. I did not get a visual of my loved ones, but words were in the phrasing that they would use. And Noelle, could you read the bottom of that? Because I can't, it looks like you might be covering that up on my end.
Sure, it says, outside the session, I awoke with profound ideas the night after my session.
I think what's interesting to point out about Lynn is that it's a sensory kind of experience, and it may not necessarily be a visual one. There were some reports where clients have a visual experience, and other times where they may have more of an auditory experience, or they're having words that are coming to them, like Lynn says here in the phrasing that their loved ones would use. So there's no typical necessarily IADC experience for each person.
Thank you. So in terms of the summary and implications, these are our limitations.
So the limitations that we had were, we did have sufficient power, but we also had a small sample size. So really we need to, it would be great to replicate this with a larger sample size to know how generalizable these results are to the larger population. Another limitation was, as Noelle discussed, in the demographics, that we had predominantly older white female participants. And this is, we have a question here of whether or not this is actually a limitation to the study, or if this is truly representative of the real world clientele who are coming to experience IADC. There was attrition that happened, especially in the traditional grief counseling group, and the traditional grief counseling versus the IADC counselor experience was quite different. And Noelle, do you want to speak a little bit more to that? Because I'm interpreting that in terms of frustration, but I can't remember exactly what we listed there.
Well, actually, I think what we noted was that the traditional grief counseling clients felt that their clients were not having the improvement that they were hoping for, and that was one of the things that they did report. The IADC counselors seemed to have consistent reports from their clients that they felt relief after the 2 sessions of counseling. And there was also additional experiences reported by the IADC counselors at times having in session, having sense of presence, having temperature changes, having their own, for lack of a better word, paranormal experiences within those sessions as well. So that was part of it. There were kind of 2 different things with that.
And if I could jump in, I think one of the things that we observed that I think we were surprised that we thought, well, 2 sessions of traditional grief counseling, like, okay, it should be, you know, somewhat helpful. But actually what we found is that it activated people's grief without giving them any relief. Mm-hmm. And people actually left, in some cases, left the 2 sessions feeling worse than they had before the session started. So traditional grief counseling doesn't mean that it couldn't work eventually, but we don't know how long it might take.
The other thing we did as part of the study was we offered the opportunity to anyone who participated in the study that was assigned to the traditional grief counseling group or the IADC group to have the opportunity to participate, to receive the other treatment after they completed the study. And we did have several participants who were in the traditional grief counseling group who chose to do IADC after the study concluded. And they did report that that was beneficial for them. So only
one person who was in the IADC group who wanted traditional grief counseling after. So again, it seemed like IADC really worked for people and traditional grief counseling didn't.
At least not in this model.
Yeah.
In terms of we don't know how many sessions of grief counseling might be needed to provide relief for clients.
And then the final limitation that's listed there is really a need to do additional follow-up to kind of see if these gains are sustained by clients or if there's any kind of drop-off with that. So there's that question of, you know, they have these positive effects, but how long do they actually last?
Yeah. So in terms of the clinical implications, most IADC clients reported a sense of presence of the deceased in some form, visual, tactile, auditory, telepathic. There was some sense of presence that was reported by most of the clients in the study that got the IADC treatment. Compared to traditional grief counseling, the IADC treatment yielded significantly greater overall grief symptom improvement. There was a significant reduction of blame and anger, a near significant reduction of despair, and an increase in the sense of continuing presence. And we did have small effects in 3 of the 4 remaining variables, even though we didn't have true significance there. So beyond the quantitative results, the counselors, the IADC counselors observed even greater qualitative benefits in terms of the reports the clients made in their statements, in their comments. And I'm hoping to do a future study transcribing all of these sessions and then doing a qualitative analysis of the statements the clients made, because we anecdotally heard so many statements regarding peace and love, having an energetic shift from feeling very constricted and tight to open and expansive, feeling a sense of continuing bond with the disembodied, and having secondary benefits, which included things like improvement in symptoms related to other kinds of difficulties. Like I had a client who had an eating disorder who actually reported some shift in her self-concept and her shift related to behaviors that were connected with the eating disorder. So it does seem like there are some secondary gains, not just related to grief, that could be gained from after-death communication. And then the traditional grief counselors reported limited client change, sometimes grief activation without resolution, like Jan mentioned. One of the main things that we did find was the importance of integrating this experience, helping people who have had after-death communication experiences integrate and make meaning out of those experiences. And that was particularly true in cases of traumatic grief. Because I did have a client who had a son die from suicide, and she had some a little bit of difficulty with the initial experience. She had a profound after-death communication with her son, but then had some activation of some of her own trauma, not related to his death, but related to her own abandonment. And so there was a real need to integrate and help her understand that experience in a larger context of her life and her experiences as well. So Jan, this is yours.
Jan, you're on mute.
Thank you. Probably the biggest thing that came out of the study is that our results warrant further research. This really seems like a promising approach that can help people reduce grief symptoms very efficiently. But we need to replicate this, have the study replicated with corrected limitations that we just talked about. And we need to compare IADC grief therapy with EMDR grief therapy. There is an Italian study going on to do this comparison. And for those of you who are clinicians and might be interested, the differences, the 2 primary differences are that in IADC, we go to the core sadness. We actually ask the client, what's the worst aspect of your grief? And that's really how we proceed with the bilateral stimulation and onward. In EMDR, they ask the person, what's your worst memory from the passing of this person? So they really are going to different things. And we're interested to see if one is more effective than another. Of course, we think that going to the core sadness is more effective, but research will tell. And of course, in IADC, there is the intention to facilitate ADC. In EMDR, there's no intention. So how often does ADC occur spontaneously with EMDR grief therapy, and how does all that relate to reduction of grief symptoms and so forth? And then we need to make sure that any future study, that there's consistency in the IADC protocol. We found we had to do some continuing to consult with each other to make sure we remained on the same page in terms of the process itself.
Jan, we just got a question asking, what is EMDR?
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. This person maybe came in after the beginning when I talked about it. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is a technique involving bilateral stimulation, meaning rhythmic alternate stimulation of both sides of the brain, either through eye movement by moving fingers back and forth in front of the person's eyes, or tapping the backs of their hands, left, right, left, right, left, right, or using earphones. And it can be done with beep, beep, beep in right and left ear. And it was designed to facilitate the integration of traumatic memories so that people are relieved of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that was the technique that was being used when IADC was discovered accidentally by Al Botkin. And we mentioned how just completing the inventories sometimes intensified the grief of people. And so there's this, the gold standard of research involves using a wait list of people who don't get any kind of treatment at all. But if just filling out the instruments to assess their grief activates their grief, it's an ethical problem that they're left without any treatment or help. And so it's kind of we haven't figured out how to manage that aspect of doing a really good study. And then Noelle, my screen is blocked out. What does the last point say?
The last point says in traditional grief counseling, let me see if this helps. In traditional grief counseling, if the distress is at post-test, so at the end of the study, continuing counseling after that is warranted, but how many sessions are needed? So that was one of the questions we came up with in terms of, if you're doing the pre-test, post-test design, and you have individuals who are experiencing distress at post-test, how many sessions of counseling might you need in order to reduce that distress that you're rating at post-test? And so that would be another area to extend the research and see, for example, we knew there was relief after the IADC sessions. How many sessions of traditional grief counseling would it take to kind of reduce the distress?
Yeah, good. Or should we just refer everybody to IADC because we know that it seems to be effective? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and finally, counselors who do this technique need to be prepared for their own for additional transpersonal experiences, both with clients and with themselves. And we don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, to tell that, but we've, as Noelle mentioned, she experienced one time a dramatic shift in the temperature in the room. I had an experience of psychokinesis, and people having their, and I've had experiences of mediumship while I'm guiding a client and getting information about them that they don't share, that later is verified as accurate. Very unique information. So so people just need to be prepared for unusual things to happen above and beyond the ADCs. And we have a page of references for anybody who wants to read further. And I think that's, and also Noelle is now executive director of the, what's the name of
the International IADC Board. So Al Botkin retired as of August and asked me to take over as executive director for the board that handles IADC training worldwide. And so we have a website which is going to be updated soon, where you can go to get information about training and more information about IADC.
And Noelle provides training. We have gone together to train, and lots of options. We typically train groups. We'll go someplace where a therapist has organized a group of therapists who want to learn the technique. And of course, now we would do that remotely with COVID. And that's it. So we're open for questions.
And I apologize, but I'm having difficulty getting back to my Zoom. So
Your escape button isn't working, huh?
no, there we go.
Stop share, maybe.
Stop share. There we go. Got
There
it.
we go. Okay. So
I wanted to go back. We had 3 people from the first session, Jan, that had questions or comments. So I'd like to start with, I've got Christine Smith, Peter, and John, who all had questions or comments. So Christine, would you like to start since we are carrying over those from the first session?
So I felt I have an experience to share, but it sort of leads to questioning as well, because I had this experience. I had a very, very close dear friend, and we had a very fulfilling, happy year together, but he had post-traumatic stress syndrome, so he was a bit from the war in Croatia, and he'd come over here to seek refugee status. He always said that if he got to his 30th birthday and he hadn't got residency here in Britain, he was going to take his own life, which was obviously very distressing, and it was something that I tried all the time to talk him out of. Anyway, we eventually split up as a couple, and but we stayed friends. And my ex-husband came and took me over to Italy for a holiday, a breakaway, and he was still in Edinburgh. Well, we were so close. We had a lot of telepathic communication regarding this coming up eventual. I was to be away for his 30th birthday. So all this was leading up to his 30th birthday, and we had conversations every night to the extent I had to play a radio at night if I wanted to sleep. And I was calling in people to help, and one was a monk that I knew, and different people to try and persuade him that he shouldn't be taking his life. And then, which he did have a dream that the monk had come to him because he told his then partner. So I knew that things, after the event, I knew things were inspiring that way. So it got to the stage I couldn't take this communication any longer, that I would have to come back and try and do something physically present with them and try and persuade them not to. But I was on the train coming back from Italy, and we were just coming into Paris about 2:15 in the morning, and he told me he'd done it. That was it. He'd done. So that was the kind of experience of the after death. Talking that I delayed coming back up to Edinburgh because I didn't want it to be true. I stayed an extra day down in London, and I prevaricated, and then I stayed a night at a friend's house, and I got back to Edinburgh. And when I got back in the house and there was a message in the answering machine, I knew what it was going to be. And when I played it, it was like the whole world stopped for a second as it got confirmed that he had taken his life. But what was more shocking to me was the realization that the whole experience had been an actual lived-through experience. I wasn't making up my mind, all these conversations, we were actually having them. And when I was calling on help from the priests, it was communicating to him because he had the dream about the monk coming to him to try and tell him not to be doing this. And the whole episode, in fact, it's the anniversary at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning, the 7th of November, when it actually happened. And last night, so it seems like a solid thing to be talking to you about because of the butterfly in the room last night. The butterfly came to me, and my cat was trying to kill it, trying to catch it, and I managed to get it and keep it outside and see it. But it was just, my father also spoke to me after he died when I was quite distressed about his passing. He said, it's okay. He just said the angels with him, and it's, to me, that knowledge that life goes on after after the passing out of the body, because I always call our life at the moment is embodied spirit. We are embodied spirit. And I feel if more people trusted and believed that life went on disembodied, there'd be less grief and less need for the counselling, and less, people could be more relaxed in themselves and understand that these things are communicating, are real. They're not fiction in our heads. They're not a psychosis. They are events, and I think people would feel more comfortable with it if they knew it was if the message could get out to everybody that this is a truth. Life goes on. It doesn't stop at death. We've been so brainwashed into believing we've got this one and only chance, and after that there's no more. So you've got to do it right in this life. But if it could get out there that it's not the end, and it might get people more relaxed about death and not be so grieving, and a lot of people ruin their lives quickly. They can't let that experience go in order to enjoy what's life.
Yeah,
it should be the most important thing that we have. I think.
Amen, sister.
Thank you so much, Christine, for sharing that. Peter, I know you had a question from earlier. Oh, I'm sorry, Christine.
Sorry, I just wanted to verbalize it rather than try and write it all out, because
yes. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Peter, I know you had a question from the first session.
Oops,
You're muted.
Yeah, Peter, can you unmute yourself? There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Noel and Janet, yours is really the best unit that can answer this question, simply because of your experience of ADCs. Can you summarize for me the death process and how it happens after people leave their body? What have you found out?
Well, you're asking if people who have had after-death communication have learned from their disembodied loved one what the dying process was like. Is that what you're asking, Peter?
Well, it's the process itself, but yes, that's would be your source of information. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, actually. In after-death communication, people don't usually focus on the dying process. The focus of these communications is usually, I'm still here, connected to you, I'm well, and I'm going to see you again someday. So it's a message of hope and reassurance. And so people don't usually focus on the dying process itself. I would say that we probably have more information about at least the first few moments of death from near-death experiencers, who've come close to death and survived. Especially people who've had cardiac arrest, as you well know. So now, all that said, I have read a couple of books. Both of them were written by widowers, men whose wives had passed. And in both cases, they had extensive after-death communication with them, so much so that they wrote a book about all they learned from their disembodied wife about not only the dying process, but the being dead process, like what existence is like outside of the body after physical existence. And there are some similarities in that they confirm that in the dying process, once they actually died, they were not suffering, that they felt disconnected from their physical body, and experienced freedom and joy and love and so forth, and that and then following the transition itself, that their existence continued to have purpose, and also that it was difficult for them to explain exactly, because things happen in the transmaterial domain that are just qualitatively different than the material domain. So, so it was interesting to read two different books and see that there was quite a bit of overlap between what these two men were getting from their disembodied wives. These men didn't know each other. You know, these are completely separate individuals, but hearing some very similar kinds of information. I don't know if that addresses what you were asking.
Yes, that's very helpful, because I'm, as you rightly said, totally familiar with the near-death experience and the progress through it, etc. And you can follow people a certain distance as they're dying, but after that, of course, you can't.
Right.
The only way to get any information would be after-death communication.
Yeah.
And in fact, what I would like to know is, do they go into a different sort of realm? The dying process suggests they do.
Yes.
And love and light is one of the things which is there. But if you go back to some accounts of this from the 1920s, Kardec is probably one of the people one can think of. They talk about a sort of different spiritual levels, but they have buildings on the lower levels which are very, very like 1920 buildings. And so one feels that it's not going to be like that. And that what they're doing is they're talking about something they know.
Yeah.
So I'll be interested.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
John, I know you had a question from earlier, John Quarter.
Well, it's addition to it. I read a while back. I'm a bit confused about this actually. I read Alan Botkin's book, and I read the companion Hello from Heaven, and I can't remember which it says. It says the deceased know far more than we do, and the afterlife is not open for tourism. I can't remember which book is in one of those. Now, following on from that, I'll go on to the newly opened research, the Psychedelic Research Centre in Imperial College London, and they're using psilocybin. They're getting over depression, and people see a new realm, but they don't see deceased relatives. All they get is a view of the realm. It's like they get the travel brochure, but don't actually get to go there. Now, could this be because I think also, as Alan Bodkin said, if you aren't truly grieving, if you're just doing it because you're curious, it ain't going to work, mate. And the fact that it's being induced by a drug, you're not going to go all the way, because you are not truly in command of the transition process.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about the part about grieving, because people have after-death communication who are not grieving, and you know, like mediums have very ongoing communication with the disembodied. They're not grieving and get a lot of good information from them. But I do think that it's possible that a drug can maybe partly open the door, but maybe not as fully as having a natural experience.
Yes, but I think also that there are certain drugs reported to impede deathbed visions.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if psilocybin might sort of help you go part of the way, but then there's something, I'm not a neurologist, would say, no, it's not getting any further. I don't know whether psilocybin, I know, contains DMT, and it's probably not enough, or it's too much, or it's not the type, but the pituitary gland produces 5-DMT, doesn't it? Whereas others, you need the N-DMT. If you haven't got the right one, you probably say, no, mate, you're not going to work. You're not coming here.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things that would be interesting to do is a comparative study of people who've had psilocybin experiences and near-death experiences to assess the after effects, and just see whether there is a significant difference between a natural kind of experience versus a facilitated one, facilitated by drug.
Yeah, because I remember it, but 3 years ago, I asked Stuart Hameroff. I quizzed him about ketamine when he was in London. He said, "Yeah, it goes part of the way, but then it stops. it doesn't. It sort of gives you a glimpse, but that's it. I think it's either side. It might be the same."
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I want to just get a check on time here. Andrew, can you give me a sense of our time frame?
Sure. Yeah, we're coming up on time quite quickly. The Q&A normally is set to finish about now, and then we're going to finish the call with a word cloud exercise once we wrap up the final concluding with thank yous and remarks. But yeah. Maybe if we could have one more very quick question or comment, there's time for that, and then we'll need to move to close.
All right. I see Tubi had his hand up first, so I'll just go with that.
Hi, Tubi.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for very interesting presentation research. And the IADC is looking very promising and very effective comparing to traditional modes. My question to you, I assume that all the trainer or all the practitioners that you train, that all of them in some way believe in this area. My question is, we've got more than 7,000 therapists in the National Health Service in the UK. If I want to, in some way, I'm collaborating now with many therapists and I'm doing clinical trials on a large scale. I love to find a way to bring it. But my concern is that then for the National Service, many of the therapists will not believe in this. So is it any way that we can take your method and train therapists who don't believe in this, that they can help in some protocol that we can see that it's effective, even the therapists themselves are not believe. So how we can introduce something like this and do like clinical trials in the National Health Service in the UK?
That's an excellent question, because, you know, I think the hard part is when belief gets in the way of the evidence of what is effective, then there's a question of, well, if you know this is effective and helpful, then what is there to believe? It's really about looking at clinical effectiveness. I mean, same thing happened with EMDR. When EMDR was first introduced into the fields of mental health, there was a lot of skepticism about this whole idea of moving your hand back and forth in front of someone's eyes and that helping them with trauma. And it was highly criticized for a long time. And now it's one of the best researched and most effective methods of trauma treatment. So
it's accepted in the National Service,
Right. So I do. This is not unheard of in the fields of medicine or science or mental health to have new procedures, new protocols introduced that people are skeptical of and question and doubt because of belief. But I do think that the more we can conduct scientific inquiry, empirical studies, the more evidence we have to support its effectiveness, the harder it becomes to say, well, I don't believe in this. And I also do think there's something in how we couch it. I think it's important in how we approach talking about IADC and ADC and helping people normalize and depathologize after death communication to begin with can help in that process of, and again, looking where the evidence points us and see where there's benefit to these experiences happening spontaneously. Therefore, if there's a method of facilitating them, it could bring benefit. So to me, I'm look to the science, look to the evidence, and
we'll try to see maybe we can collaborate and try it in the
I would be thrilled.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
And you know, as an interim, it can some people may find it more acceptable to think of the ADC itself as kind of like a helpful metaphor that the client is generating, and they can think about it that way until they start to have their own transpersonal experiences and realize that and we're back to that experiencing is knowing, but just treating it as helpful metaphor as an interim to be open to trying it.
I thought this can be a good metaphor for the energies, for the therapists themselves, until they will have the experience with the patient.
Yeah. And the question of, is this real or imaginary, has come up, and to respond to that idea, because much of this happens on an internal experience for the client. They're having their own sensory or internal experience of this. One of the things in terms of helping therapists maybe be more accepting of the idea is to say, you know, whether it's real or something that is a process internal and in some ways imaginary to the individual, if it's beneficial and helps them heal. Isn't that what we're about as mental health professionals?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's a very powerful take-home message for the day. I've been watching the comments throughout this session this afternoon, and there's a lot of resonance there for people's own experiences. There's a real sense that it validates the experiences that they've had that they've maybe been struggling to make sense of. And that's a powerful message for people to take away. Speaking of experiences, we had a chat that some of you may have heard earlier on. We're very excited to see the number of accounts of experiences that people have reported in the chat. And if people do want to share more detailed accounts of their experiences with us, we'd be very interested to hear from people. So we're going to leave a contact email and also maybe a contact web address for people to get in touch after the session, or perhaps through David as well. David Lorimer, you can get in touch with us. And we'd be very happy to hear more from you about your experiences. It finally falls to me to ask everybody to show your appreciation for a very exciting and powerful set of presentations this afternoon. So please show your appreciation in the chat. Sometimes people open the mics and we get a round of applause, so that works wonderfully. But perhaps the chat is the safer option.
We will open the mics right at the end, and I think we're going to hand over to Ollie to lead us in using a word cloud function. If there's anything more you want to say, Chris.
That's fine with me. So let's move over to Ollie to wrap up.
Fantastic.
Ollie, do you want to do the word function first, and then I will just say a few wrap-up remarks?
Sure.
Word cloud. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just wait until all the thanks are in because I need a static chat. So once all that's in, then I can share the link in the chat and it won't disappear immediately. So anyway, so what I'm going to do in just a few seconds is share a link in the chat function. And you'll see if you click on that link, it'll send you to a web page where you can input 3 words to describe your experience of the day. And so if you do that, then I'll do a screen share and magically a word cloud of your words will appear on the screen. At least that's what's supposed to happen. Here's the link. See, it's menti.com/stuff. So have a click on that and you'll be taken to a web page where you'll be asked to enter 3 words to describe your experience of Beyond the Brain today. So whatever spontaneously comes to mind to capture your experience. And I'm just about to do a screen share of the word cloud, which will gradually grow as we get more and more words. Can you all see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, looking good.
You can see the number at the bottom, how many people have responded.
That's exactly right. So there's room for more. Well, David, why don't you go ahead while that's just gradually growing on the screen, and you can do your plenary.
Yes, no, well, that's fascinating. I was one of the ones who put down inspiring as my first word.
Well, that seems to be the
seems to be the winner.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to draw a few threads together from the day, mentioning all the contributions that we've had. And I think it's been a vintage day, a vintage day beyond the brain. I think everybody will agree. And I think the tutelary spirit of the day is undoubtedly William James. And he was mentioned specifically by Ian this morning in terms of the way that he reframed psychology. He used psychology, philosophy, and parapsychology together. And his approach to experience is what he called radical empiricism. And I think we've seen examples of this radical empiricism today, particularly this afternoon. And also, I think it reinforces the general case that we're making of consciousness needing to be treated as a fundamental feature of the universe, not something that arises in some sort of periphery. Again, this morning we heard about the importance of Whitehead's work. I have a feeling that Whitehead is really coming into his own now, and more people are talking about pan-experientialism and the pervasiveness of intelligence and sentience in the universe. And I was very taken, as I think I mentioned at the time, by this duality of the shaping and the resistance, and the fact that we need life, we need the resistance in life, we need challenges in life in order to shape ourselves. And I think many people who've been talking today have given examples of that. And I was also reminded of Richard Tarnas in the epilogue of his book, The Passion of the Western Mind, about the process of bringing differentiated conscious life and beings into being. And then at the same time, this being a process of nature or the world or existence coming to know itself more and more deeply. And I think we've had this running through the day as well, an evolution of consciousness. And then from Tamara, I got the importance of attention. And one of the people who I'm inspired by is Simone Weil. And this book here, she was a French philosopher, is Selected Essays. And as it happens, I was just reading an old edition of The Week, and it said, attention, this is from Simone Weil, is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And what Weil was saying was that we need opportunities of silence and solitude to develop our attention. And I think this is an essay called Human Personality. And developing our attention is also developing our focus. And she says that the most disinterested, intense, pure, gratuitous, generous attention is love. And that has been a theme of the day, a connecting theme of the day as well. Tamara was talking about it in terms of listening, deep listening, compassion, and the stabilizing of our attention and our emotions, and seeing how we can get past what she was referring to at the end. And we'll have another event on this, the collective psychosis of ADHD and the digital revolution. So coming to this afternoon, I felt that this was exactly consistent with the aim of the Galileo Commission that I mentioned at the beginning, which is widening the evidence base of a science of consciousness. So the ADC, for me, widens this evidence base. And we've seen a fascinating presentation, two presentations this afternoon, which have also brought in the importance of these fruits of the spirit. I was struck by the fruits of the spirit and the analysis of that. as well as the number of instances that we've had during the day of veridical cases, of cases where then the man with the revolver, for instance, it's like the Chaffin Will case, for those of you who know the literature, and that veridical information comes from the deceased person in a dream, and then the person finds the thing which corresponds exactly to what the dream specified. And these are the kind of questions which Swedenborg was grappling with. Kant was trying to explain things away already in the 18th century when Swedenborg had these sort of experiences. So these are the really humanly meaningful experiences that we kind of major on in Beyond the Brain, and which I think are equally irreducible. You can't just explain them away. When there is this evidential backup, this evidential confirmation of the kind that we've had this afternoon, you can't simply dismiss it. Or if you do, then I think you're lacking in integrity. And then finally, this point came up towards the end. I felt this normalizing and depathologization is absolutely key. And we've been discussing this, Chris and Callum and Evelyn and I have been discussing this in terms of the publications of our research and what sort of words we can use. And it's very hard to get something published unless you use a word that implies that this is a hallucination of some sort, that it isn't really real. You won't get it into the Lancet or the main medical journals, because the assumption and belief, ill-informed as it is so profound and deep-rooted that these things cannot be taken literally. When this is exactly what we need to do. We need to open up. People need to look through the telescope. We need to open up to these possibilities and realize through, and the French have this word, and Ian mentioned this morning, connaître, not savoir. So connaître is to be personally acquainted with, to have an experience of something, whereas savoir is just related to knowledge of facts. And what we're talking about here is experience leading to knowing. This presentation should be given to the Royal College of Psychiatrists, Spirituality and Psychiatry interest group, because this would be a cutting edge for this sort of, even be trained people doing training in it. And Peter can help with that, and Larry Culliford. I'm not sure if Larry's on the call. So thank you all so much for everybody who's contributed today, all the people who've contributed in the chat. We've had some extraordinary experiences. And Evelyn, are you happy to be the port of call for people initially writing in with their experiences? In which case, could you kindly put your email? We'll put this in, we'll send this out to people in the recording as well. If you could kindly put your email in the chat to everybody, then that would start things off. And we'll also have, the chat is recorded. In other words, we harvest the chat. And so we will have some initial material already from you from the chat, but we won't always know who it's from, because if it just says Liz, then we're not quite sure necessarily which Liz we're talking about. So my thanks to everyone, and I'll hand back over to Ollie to share his final screen.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I shared the word cloud in the chat, and so but there it is. It's a lovely visual, verbal encapsulation of today: inspiring, fascinating, interesting, stimulating, affirmative, enjoyable, beautiful, brilliant, fantastic, mysterious. Explosive.
That's what we try to do. That's what we try to present. So I'm delighted to see that, and very rewarding for everybody who has been participating as presenters today.
Yes, thanks all.
So I think it only remains for us to unmute everyone. Tomorrow evening we will have a bar, virtual bar, coordinated by Paul Kienowicz from Poland, but tonight we're not having a bar, so you have to go get your own drinks, and so we'll see you in that case tomorrow at 10 o'clock or just before for the next part of the program. So thank you very much indeed, everyone. And thank you to Andrew for his holding the fort.
Yes.
Great stuff. Shall I? I'll unmute everyone now, and we can go to gallery view. And everyone, if everyone wants to say a quick hello, a quick goodbye, and thank you. Everyone's unmuted. So thank you so much, everyone. Today it's been fantastic.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. It was brilliant.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Noel. Thanks, Amanda.
Right.
Thank you, Chris.
Very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you and bye.
Bye.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Congratulations for a nice work.
Yeah, great day. Yeah, wonderful day.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice.